It happened in less than 30 seconds. A billionaire CEO looked across a polished conference table, glanced at a quiet single father asking for a modest $4,000 emergency loan, laughed in front of an entire boardroom, and dismissed him as someone who would never matter. Before the sun reached its afternoon peak, that same woman would discover that the man she humiliated quietly controlled the one financial approval standing between her company and the $185 million that could save everything she had spent 20 years building. That if you believe kindness always matters, that forgiveness is stronger than revenge, and that every person deserves dignity no matter their bank account, please like this video, leave a comment, share this story with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to our channel so our community can continue sharing stories that remind us never to judge a person's worth by their circumstances. Graham Mercer had never imagined his life would become so small. 10 years earlier he had been a respected infrastructure finance specialist whose work helped communities secure funding for hospitals, water systems, and transportation projects. Then a highway accident claimed his wife, leaving him to raise his 6-year-old daughter, Eliza, alone. Overnight his priorities changed. He stepped away from executive opportunities that demanded endless travel and accepted quieter consulting work so he could be present for every school recital, every doctor's appointment, every difficult homework assignment, and every birthday that his daughter feared would never feel complete without her mother. The sacrifices were worth it, but they came with consequences. Consulting income rose and fell unpredictably. Graham lived carefully, drove an aging pickup truck, wore suits that had been tailored years earlier, and measured every expense before spending a dollar. His greatest wealth wasn't in his savings account but in the laughter that returned to Eliza's face each afternoon when he picked her up from school. Then life tested him again. Eliza developed a rare hearing condition that required immediate treatment before permanent damage occurred. Insurance covered most of the procedure, but deductibles, specialized therapy, and travel expenses created a sudden gap of $4,000. Graham had exhausted every emergency fund he had built since losing his wife. Pride meant nothing compared to his daughter's future. A longtime acquaintance suggested approaching Hawthorne Capital Foundation, a charitable lending division attached to one of the country's fastest-growing investment firms. The foundation publicly promoted itself as helping hard-working families bridge temporary financial emergencies. Graham gathered every financial record, every medical document, every repayment plan, and arrived precisely on time for his appointment. The company headquarters reflected enormous success. Sunlight poured through towering glass walls, polished marble floors mirrored expensive artwork, and employees moved with practiced confidence. Graham felt out of place carrying a worn leather folder that had survived nearly 15 years. The CEO, Celeste Whitmore, happened to be touring the foundation offices with senior executives after a media interview celebrating the company's record profits. Brilliant, ambitious, and relentlessly driven, Celeste had built an empire from almost nothing. Investors admired her discipline, competitors feared her instincts, and business magazines praised her as one of the most influential executives in North America. Success, however, had slowly replaced empathy with efficiency. When Graham's appointment experienced a scheduling mix-up, an assistant mistakenly directed him into a conference room where Celeste and her leadership team were finishing another meeting. Thinking he was expected, Graham politely introduced himself and explained that he had an appointment regarding an emergency assistance loan. Someone quietly whispered that the request totaled only $4,000. Several executives smiled politely. Celeste did not. She looked briefly at Graham's worn jacket, his old briefcase, and the paperwork in his hands before remarking that successful people solved problems before they became emergencies. She questioned why someone asking for such a small amount deserved corporate resources when thousands of stronger applicants competed for assistance. She suggested that if a man reached middle age needing $4,000, perhaps he had already demonstrated poor financial judgment. The room became painfully silent. No one laughed loudly, but enough uncomfortable smiles appeared to deepen the humiliation. Graham felt every pair of eyes fixed upon him. He wanted to explain the accident that took his wife, the years devoted to raising a child alone, the medical emergency, and the countless quiet sacrifices invisible to strangers. Instead, he simply thanked everyone for their time, gathered his papers, and walked away with his dignity still intact, even though his heart felt unbearably heavy. What no one in that room realized was that Graham had not completely left the world of finance. Several years earlier, after leaving executive life, he accepted a confidential appointment as an independent voting trustee for Meridian Civic Trust, one of the nation's largest institutional infrastructure investment funds. The position carried little public recognition because trustees intentionally avoided publicity to protect investment neutrality. Graham rarely discussed it, not even with friends. His responsibility was straightforward but enormously important. Before Meridian released major financing for public-private infrastructure partnerships, every project required unanimous trustee certification confirming ethical compliance, financial transparency, and governance integrity. Point 1 Pending certification happened to involve Hawthorne Capital. The company desperately needed Meridian's $185 million financing package to complete a nationwide clean water initiative that investors had already celebrated publicly. Construction contracts had begun. Municipal partners expected funding within days. Delays could trigger penalties worth millions. That afternoon, Graham attended the scheduled trustee review. He entered an entirely different office building several miles away, carrying the same worn leather folder. Nobody cared about his truck, nobody noticed his inexpensive watch. Inside the boardroom, everyone simply addressed him as Trustee Mercer. Stacks of compliance reports covered the conference table. As Graham carefully reviewed Hawthorne Capital's submission, one detail immediately captured his attention. A small vendor payment had been concealed within a consulting expense. The amount itself wasn't enormous, but tracing the documentation revealed undisclosed conflicts involving one of Hawthorne's senior executives. Meridian's policies required complete transparency. Without clarification, certification could not legally proceed. Graham calmly requested additional documentation before signing approval. The entire financing package stopped. Within an hour, emergency calls erupted. Across Hawthorne Capital headquarters, executives scrambled to understand why Meridian suddenly suspended the transaction. Celeste assumed another institution was demanding better terms. She never imagined the decision rested with the quiet father she had mocked earlier that morning. Late in the afternoon, Meridian requested Hawthorne's executive leadership attend an urgent clarification meeting. Celeste arrived confident she could resolve whatever misunderstanding existed. The confidence disappeared the moment Graham entered the conference room. Recognition spread slowly across her face. She stared silently as Meridian's chairperson welcomed Trustee Graham Mercer and thanked him for his meticulous attention to governance standards. Only then did Celeste understand. The man she had publicly humiliated wasn't seeking influence. He already possessed it. He simply never needed anyone to know. Embarrassment settled heavily over the room. Some executives avoided eye contact, others suddenly remembered the morning meeting with painful clarity. Celeste felt something unfamiliar. Shame. As documentation was reviewed, Graham remained completely professional. He never mentioned the earlier humiliation. He never raised his voice. He never hinted at revenge. Every question focused entirely on missing disclosures, ethical obligations, and public accountability. His fairness somehow made the silence even more painful. Eventually the investigation revealed that Hawthorne's chief operating officer had intentionally hidden consulting relationships benefiting a close relative. The undisclosed arrangement violated Meridian's governance requirements and could have exposed taxpayers and investors to significant legal risk. The financing delay had nothing to do with Graham's emotions. It resulted from facts. Within 48 hours the COO resigned, independent auditors verified corrected documentation, governance reforms were implemented immediately. Only after every requirement had been satisfied did Graham quietly sign the certification authorizing the $185 million release. The project survived, thousands of construction jobs remained secure. Communities waiting for improved water infrastructure would receive it on schedule. Yet the financial victory brought Celeste no peace. She couldn't stop remembering the expression on Graham's face when he quietly gathered his papers after her careless remarks. For the first time in years she wondered how many people she had judged without knowing their stories, determined to confront her mistake. Honestly, Celeste visited the neighborhood where Graham lived. She expected resentment. Instead she found him helping children plant flowers outside a small community center while Eliza laughed beside him. Carefully watering newly planted roses, watching them from a distance, Celeste noticed something that wealth had never purchased for her: peace. When Graham finally approached, she apologized without excuses. she admitted that success had slowly convinced her appearances revealed character. She confessed that she had mistaken financial hardship for personal failure. She acknowledged that the deepest embarrassment came not from discovering Graham's authority but from realizing she had forgotten how to see people. Graham listened quietly. He explained that losing his wife had taught him how quickly circumstances could change. The strongest people he had ever met weren't always the richest. Many simply carried invisible burdens while choosing kindness anyway. He admitted the morning had hurt deeply, not because of the rejected loan, because his daughter had trusted him when he promised compassionate people still existed. Celeste's eyes filled with tears. She asked about Eliza's treatment. When Graham described the hearing procedure, Celeste discovered that foundation staff had never actually reviewed his application because the meeting interruption had prevented normal processing. Without publicity or special treatment, the foundation completed the review properly. Graham qualified immediately, the emergency loan was approved with no interest, and after reviewing the medical documentation, the board unanimously converted much of the assistance into a grant under existing hardship policies. Graham accepted only what the program genuinely allowed, refusing any personal favors connected to Meridian. His integrity impressed everyone involved. The experience transformed Hawthorne Capital in unexpected ways. Celeste ordered every executive, herself included, to spend one full day each month working directly with foundation applicants, listening to their stories before reviewing numbers. Reception areas were redesigned to feel welcoming rather than intimidating. Loan officers received empathy training alongside financial education. Performance reviews began measuring compassion as seriously as profitability. The foundation also introduced the Mercer Family Dignity Initiative, a policy requiring every applicant to be treated with respect regardless of loan size or financial history. Graham initially resisted having his name attached to anything. Celeste convinced him by explaining that future families deserved protection from the kind of humiliation he had endured. Years later, employees still spoke about the day everything changed, not because a financing package had nearly collapsed, not because a powerful executive had been embarrassed, but because one quiet father proved that true influence rarely announces itself. Real strength doesn't need expensive clothes, real wisdom doesn't seek applause. Real character reveals itself when someone has every opportunity to retaliate but instead chooses integrity. Eliza eventually recovered successfully. Her hearing improved steadily through therapy, and she often volunteered at the same community center where children still planted flowers every spring. Graham continued living simply, never chasing recognition, content knowing that his greatest achievement had never been hidden authority or financial expertise. It had been raising a daughter who believed kindness remained stronger than pride. Celeste also changed. Business magazines continued celebrating her corporate success, but the recognition she treasured most came from employees who quietly said the company had become a place where people felt seen instead of judged. She often reminded new managers that every resume represented a human story they could not possibly understand at first glance. Before this story ends, we'd love to hear from you. Please leave a meaningful comment sharing a moment when someone looked beyond appearances and treated you with kindness, or a time when you learned never to judge another person's struggle too quickly. Your story may encourage someone else who needs hope today. If this story touched your heart, please like this video, leave a meaningful comment, share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to our channel so you never miss another emotional journey. Remember, the smallest act of respect can change a life, the quietest person in the room may carry the greatest responsibility, and the richest heart is never measured by the balance in a bank account but by the compassion it shows when another human being needs understanding the most.